As Father said, as Dan said, my name is Dan Palmieri, co-founder of JMJ Missions. That's like Jesus, Mary, and Joseph Missions. Okay. So my friend Anthony is also here, but just like a little secret that we weren't going to say, but whatever. Anthony, both of us actually are taking grad classes in theology. I'm like 2 classes away from a master's. Pray for me, right? So he actually had a class Zoom at the exact same time as this event that just got rescheduled. So he would be in the back, but he's like doing a Zoom in the car somewhere. That's where he is. But what we do is we do all kinds of things. We give talks. We have a podcast. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok for the young people. Facebook for the old people. No offense. Just kidding. I have Facebook too. I guess I'm getting older too. I have 3 little kids at home. Pray for me for that too, please. They're 3, 1, and 0 are the ages, literally. So people say, oh, it's like organized chaos. Like, nope, it's just chaos. Anyway, the talk is on the Eucharist tonight, which is really appropriate because I can't think of a better spot to speak about the Eucharist and the presence of the tabernacle than like randomly on the beach. But it's a great spot because look how cool this is. There's so many places we could be. But here on the Bradley Beach gazebo on this beautiful promenade, and the weather held up. So, praise God for that. This is going to be a great night. So it's just wonderful for us to be here. And I want to thank both priests at both parishes for having us out. And, of course, Dan. Let's give Dan one more round of applause. He sounded fantastic. Not too much of a round of applause, my goodness. All right. Okay. So, so that's that. Oh, and by the way, when it comes to Dan, I met him for the first time a few years ago. If some of you guys might have been there, I actually gave a totally different talk, about a mile that way, in Belmar at the Taylor Pavilion. And at that time, I said, it was so nice to meet Dan. I said, because, we had so many similarities. He's Dan. I'm Dan. He had experience with ministry. I had experience with ministry. He had just gotten married. I had just gotten married. He just had a son at that time named Dan. You just met him. I have a little son, same exact age, named Dan. Seems like a wonderful, awesome, talented guy. No. Okay. Anyway, yeah, right? I told that joke the first time. So if you guys remember that, good for you. All right, so story to start off. There was a Dominican priest, a Jesuit priest, and a Franciscan priest. You can tell where this is going. Walking along, arguing over theology. And as they're talking and debating, this fully fledged appearance of the Blessed Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph and baby Jesus, the nativity scene, full-fledged apparition appears right in front of them. And it's beautiful, right? And the Franciscan priest falls to his knees at the sight of the utter poverty at this beautiful manger, and he just starts crying. The Dominican priest, his mind always buzzing with theology, right, sees all these parallels between Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the Holy Trinity, and he starts crying. And then the Jesuit priest, he walks up to St. Joseph, and he puts his arm around him, and he says, so have you thought about where you're going to send your kid to school yet? I'm going to get in such big trouble for that one day, I know it. One time, I told that joke, and I didn't realize that there was 3 or 4 Jesuit priests in the back that had heard confessions. So I immediately followed that up with all the universities and these great things about St. Ignatius of Loyola and all the great saints. Speaking of Jesuits, did you hear what happened with the Pope? The Pope, anyone hear about this story? So he was in Rome, obviously. He was getting on a flight. He hadn't driven a car in a while. He's been Pope for a while. And even in Argentina, he rode the bus. He didn't really drive too often. So his driver's about to take him to the airport. And he says to the driver, can I get in the driver's seat and drive around? It's been a while. I'd like to get back behind the wheel. Driver's a little hesitant, but he says he's the Pope. He's not going to say no. He says, sure. So he sits in the back seat, and the Pope takes the driver's seat. Unfortunately, the Pope is very, very rusty. He's all over the road. He's weaving in and out. He's on the curb, and he's not driving well. And, of course, he looks in the rearview mirror, and the police lights are going off. Uh-oh. He gets pulled over. The police officer walks up, takes a look at the car, sees the Pope in the front seat, driver in the back, goes back, says, Chief, we got a problem here. Radios the chief. Chief says, what? He goes, we just pulled over somebody really important. He goes, who, like the mayor or something? He goes, no, he's bigger than that. He goes, who, like a celebrity? He goes, no, bigger than that. What, like the prime minister? Did you pull over the prime minister or something? He goes, honestly, Chief, I don't know who we pulled over, but he's got to be really important because his driver is the Pope. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm done. I promise I'm done. No more corny jokes, I promise. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go 60 to 0 in 2 seconds right now and talk about the year 300 when it was illegal to be a Christian and people could be killed for our faith. Sorry. Sorry for that huge digression there. Year 300, 49 lay people led by a deacon, one deacon, and lay people got together and they were worshiping in secret in this deacon's house, obviously against the law, risking their lives to see each other, to celebrate the Eucharist. As they are worshiping, one of the Roman guards gets tipped off to their location. They're all arrested. Every single one of them was given a chance to give up their faith. They all said no. Every single one of them was tortured. In the midst of the torture, every single one of them held fast, would not give up their faith, ended up dying for their faith in Jesus Christ. The last one to go was the deacon who was holding them, who was housing these gatherings. And really frustrated, at a certain point, the Roman guard just loses it and says, I can't take this. Do you like seeing these people suffer the way you just saw? Do you like suffering like this? Why don't you give this up? Why do you get together and risk your lives for this? You're the only group that gets together on Sundays. It's easy to find out where you are. Why not just give this whole thing up and you can go free and spare yourselves? And what he said, I'll say it in Latin because that's the exact words he said. He said, Sine Dominico non possumus. Sine Dominico non possumus. It means we can't live without Sunday. That's what he said back to the guard before he died. We can't live without Sunday. But the interesting thing about that is that has a threefold translation. You can also translate it as we can't live without the resurrection. And finally, you can also translate it as we can't live without the Eucharist. All three of those translations are totally valid. Sine Dominico non possumus. Because for these people, Sunday, the resurrection, and the Eucharist were all one and the same thing. They were all the same idea. Their whole entire life was based on Sunday. Their whole life. To the point where they risked their lives to see each other and build each other up, and most importantly, to receive the Eucharist, which they truly, truly believed was really Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity. They really believed this. We have documents. We have Justin Martyr. We have multiple documents from the ancient times that state that these Christians really believed that was not bread. That was really Jesus, to the point where they were ready to die for it, and many of them did, including those 49 lay people and the deacon that hosted them. They're called the Martyrs of Abatine. Now compare that to today, right? Now, we do have a little bit of persecution up here, a little bit of Christians in the West now. It's getting almost like a post-Christian world. On Instagram, we have a pretty big Instagram following, and we posted about the Olympics, and I just posted a message of like love and prayer. I said that was pretty offensive what they did with the Last Supper. And by the way, I don't know if it is the Feast of the Gods. I really do think it is the Last Supper. There's all kinds of things coming out now that they knew what they were doing. And I just said a message of love and peace. I said, hey, it is offensive, but let's pray for these people. Let's show nothing but love back. That's the video I posted. Very positive. That was the most hate we have ever gotten on any post we've ever made since we've been on Instagram. So many people screaming, you are so uneducated, you don't know who you are, sarcastic, cursing at us. 80% of the comments we got. I don't know how the algorithm worked with that video, but we got so much hate. There's a little bit of persecution going on up here, but nothing like it was back then. We still have religious freedom. It's still intact. And yet we can't even fill the church because people don't understand what the Eucharist really is, right? Mass at my home diocese of Camden, but many dioceses in this area of the country, they're cutting back on masses. Why? Something's not quite triggering. Something's not quite connecting in our minds. Like, we don't understand what a gift the Eucharist is. It reminds me of a story of a non-denominational pastor who was having a problem with squirrels at his church. And no matter what he tried to do, this guy just could not get these squirrels out of his church. He tried calling pest control, and no one could get the squirrels out. They're all over the place. So very reluctantly, he calls up the Catholic priest in town, his friend. He says, are you having a problem with squirrels at your church? Priest says, no, but I can get rid of them for you. He says, okay. And one by one, this priest starts baptizing these squirrels Catholic. The minister says, whoa, buddy, I didn't ask you to baptize him. He goes, it's okay. Now they'll only be back on Christmas and Easter, right? You laughed at that, not me. I'm going to get in trouble for that one, too, at some point. Either way. But you know what? That's funny because it's like a little bit true, you know? If we truly understood what the Eucharist really was, what a gift the Eucharist is, every single Mass would be overflowing, it'd be packed. And there'd be 12 Masses a weekend at every Catholic church if we really understood what that truly is, right? The body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. To really understand it, though, you know what we got to do? We got to go back to the beginning. Adam and Eve, the first two human beings. You know what's interesting? God tends to fix sin the same way it comes in. If sin comes into the world a certain way, he tends to kick it out the same way. Think about it. How did sin come into the world? A disobedient woman, Eve, right? Eating the food, giving it to a disobedient man, Adam, who then gives it to all of creation, right? How does God kick sin out? An obedient woman, Mary, giving birth to an obedient man, Jesus, who then kicks sin out of the entire human race, right? How does sin come in? Through the mouth, through food. How does sin go out? Through food, through the Eucharist. That was not a coincidence. The reason that Jesus came as food for us is because that's how sin entered the human race in the book of Genesis. He kicks sin out, same way it came in. Really, really, really cool. So then what happens? Adam and Eve sin. And then, of course, you know the story. Darkness kind of enshrouds the world. All right, but there's a point of light in this darkness. There's one group of people, a chosen race of God, the Israelites, and he kind of protects them. But of course, those Hebrews, they end up in slavery in Egypt. And then you know the story. The 10 plagues come in, let my people go, right? Moses asked Pharaoh, and he's very stubborn. They will not go until the very last plague, which unfortunately is the death of every firstborn in the entire land. Okay? And what does God say? Take the blood of a lamb, an unblemished lamb. It had to be a perfect lamb, no blemishes. Sacrifice it, kill it, take the blood, put it on the doorposts, go inside, eat and cook that sacrifice along with unleavened bread. But wait, let's rewind for a second. That blood on the door of every Hebrew household. You know what I thought growing up? I would grow up watching like movies like 10 Commandments. You know, my mom would always, every Easter season, would put on 10 Commandments. She'd make us all sit down and watch it. I found out later it was only because she thought Charlton Heston was cute. That's really the only reason. My parents were not as devout as they should have been, you know. But I would watch this movie, and I thought the blood was there to like let the angel of death know who was Hebrew and who was Egyptian. That is not why that blood was there. I don't know if you guys can identify with that. I always thought that blood was there to let the angel know, here's who's an Egyptian, here's who's a Hebrew. Do you know anything about angels? They know a lot. They know a lot of stuff. Angels have the ability to have any kind of, did you know this? Thomas Aquinas talks about this. An angel can know anything it wants to just by thinking about it in an instant. You think that angel didn't know who was Hebrew and who was Egyptian? Of course the angel did. So why was the blood there? Why was the blood on those doorposts? It wasn't for the angel. It was for the Hebrews and for all of us as a sign. What kind of sign? Well, what does St. Paul say? The wages of sin is death. Because there's sin in the world, because we're all born with sin, because we sin ourselves, all of us have to die. Whether you're American in 2024, whether you're an Egyptian, whether you're a Hebrew, all of us are infected with this like disease of sin, this curse, right? And the penalty is death. So what's God doing? He's saying, put that blood on the door because you know what that's going to be a reminder of? Something is going to sub in and take your death. That lamb that you're sacrificing is going to take the death that we all deserve because I see something in you. And I love you, Hebrews, and I can take something out of this. Something good's about to come through the world through your line. So because I love you, I'm going to go out of my way, and I'm going to sub the lamb in so that you don't have to take that penalty of death that we all deserve. But think about it. Can a lamb save us from death? No, lamb can't save us. An animal is underneath human beings on the hierarchy of importance, right? Can an animal save us from our sins, save us from death? No, it can't. What you find out is that lamb was actually a substitute itself for something much greater that was going to come about 1,000 years later, and that's Jesus Christ. Fast forward a little bit. Jesus in the middle of his ministry. He's healing the sick. He's casting out demons. He's walking on water. He's calming storms. People love him. They're hanging on to his every word. What did he say? He says to everyone, he says, love the poor. And everyone's like, yeah, right? We never heard that one before. Great, right? Love your neighbor. Yeah, okay? Forgive people. Yeah. And then you know what he says? You have to eat me. Nobody reacted positively to that one. By the way, you got to eat me. And that's like literally almost what he says. Almost out of nowhere, he says, amen, amen, I say to you, Gospel of John chapter 6, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you don't have life in you. And everybody there was really confused. It says they started grumbling amongst themselves. What is he talking about? He says again, amen, amen, I say to you, my flesh is true food, my blood is true drink. Your ancestors ate manna in the desert and they died. But he who eats me will live forever. And they said they still were grumbling and complaining. They said, this sounds like cannibalism. I don't know if I could do this. This is weird. And then finally, they all started walking away. You know why? The original Greek translation of the Gospel of John, the word he uses, it's not like you have to eat me, like you just should consume me. You should just pray and stuff. It was, you have to physically chew or gnaw on me, like on my skin. That's what it would have sounded like to them. And they all walked off. They all walked, well, not all of them. Many of his followers, it says, walked off at that point. Now, what does he do? As a good teacher, and I'm a teacher as well, I'm a high school teacher in theology, right? If your students don't understand something, there's a big misunderstanding. If you're a good teacher, you are obliged to track them down. Wait a minute, stop, you don't understand. Here's what I really meant. Is that what Jesus does? No. They walk away, he lets them go. They said, this is too much for us. Eat you, that's weird. We're out. They all walk away. And in an amazing mic drop moment meaning when someone says this epic phrase and they drop the mic and walk off stage, like a boss. I'm not going to do that because it's Dan's mic, it's not even my mic. In a mic drop moment, as they're walking away, you know what Jesus does? He looks at his 12 best friends, the apostles, and he says, you can go too if you want. You want to go too? That's what he says. Wow. I get chills thinking about it. Like, that's epic. And what does Peter do? Peter pipes up, as he always does, and he says, no, we get it. You're talking about the Eucharist. Totally. We got it. That is not at all what Peter does. Peter has no clue what he's talking about. Peter just says, where else are we going to go? Nowhere else to go. You've done some pretty cool things. I guess we'll just try to trust you on this one. You guys know what he's talking about? They all, that in my mind, that's how it went down, They trusted him. We'll trust you. Well, what happens just a little while later? He's in the upper room. He takes the cup, takes the bread, raises it up. This is my body. Takes the cup, raises it up. This is my blood. Boom. He was talking about the Eucharist. Why didn't he explain it back then? When everyone was confused? Because it would have watered it down. It really isn't bread. It's really actually him. And what night were they celebrating? It was Passover. That was not a coincidence either. They're celebrating that lamb that was sacrificed. It's like he's saying, I'm that new lamb. I'm that sacrificial lamb. That lamb couldn't do a thing for you. It was a stand-in for me. I'm the only one that can beat death. I'm the only one who's both God and can connect you to God and perfect, that unblemished, perfect sacrifice. I'm the only one that could do that. And I'm the only one that's also human and can lay my life down for you as a human being and understand you as a human being. I'm the only one that could bridge that gap. Only Jesus could do it. And he did it through the Eucharist. At every single Mass, we pull out some incredible love. What kind of love bridged the gap between God and human beings? That infinite gap between God and humans that Adam and Eve caused when they sinned? What kind of love needed to bridge that gap? Well, you tell me. Think about the Passion. He's on his knees right after the Last Supper. He's on his knees in the Garden of Gethsemane praying. And it says his sweat became like drops of blood falling from the ground. Why? Well, he probably saw exactly what he was going to have to go through. I mean, the horrible torture. The guy wasn't a masochist. He didn't want to suffer. Like, he was always going to do it because he loved us. But his human side was having an actual panic attack. The Gospels say his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. Now, for a long time, people thought that was just an exaggeration. Oh, you know those Gospel writers. They just like to exaggerate things. That's what scholars were saying. Until recently, they found out there we go. Okay. Until recently, they found out about a condition, a very rare but real condition called hematidrosis. Hematidrosis is a condition that's very rare, but it's where someone's going through enough stress, enough emotional anxiety, like incredible amounts of it. Blood capillaries can burst underneath your skin, and your blood could go through your skin and fall to the ground like looking like sweat. Jesus, having that human kind of panic attack, knowing that he was going to have to do this and wanted to for us, but also did not want to, probably went through actual hematidrosis. Then what happens? Well, he's made to carry his cross, right? Well, first off, then he's put on trial. He's beaten. He's whipped, right? You've ever seen the Passion of the Christ? I'm not going to get into it. We're in a public place. there's like babies walking by, right? So in the Passion of the Christ, right? You see the whipping, the torture, the Roman whips. That was a horrible thing. They had like pellets on the end that would dig into the skin and take out flesh. He goes through that. He's crowned with thorns. That's a form of mental torture that the Romans used to use. He's made to carry his cross. And by the time he's made to carry his cross, he's lost so much blood he can't get up the mountain. He can't even get there because he's half dead already. Then he's held down. And as they take the nails, what does he say to the people that are literally driving nails through his hands? Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's the kind of love that bridges the gap between us and God. Only that kind of love. And did you know at every single Mass, we go back in time mystically to that sacrifice on the cross? And it's like we pull out all that love, and it's all contained right in that tiny white host. Every single time you receive the Eucharist, all of that love and his passion is packed right into each host. That's how beautiful the Eucharist is. That's how much love he wants to inject us with so he can reconnect us to himself and save our souls. And you say, well, Dan, that's too good to be true. That's just bread. It just looks like bread. Mystically going back in time and pulling the love of the cross, right? No. Well, God's been giving us signs for 2,000 years to show us, no, I do love you that much, and it is that true. For example, Pope John Paul II. Any John Paul II fans? Love John Paul II. Fastest canonized saint ever, right? Yeah. So John Paul II was coming to the United States one visit. He was coming to Baltimore. And the priest that would always organize his trips ahead of time was named Father Tucci. And he came ahead of time to organize his trip to Baltimore. And he met his American counterpart that was organizing the trip as well. And he was going to stay in the Archbishop's mansion, the Archbishop's residence there in Baltimore. And in the Archbishop's residence, there's a long group of, there's a hallway with like a group of doors, very fancy doors. All of them look identical. And the American priest and Father Tucci are standing there planning out the Pope's visit. And one of those doors had a Eucharistic adoration chapel inside of it. Father Tucci looks in that door, looks back at the American priest and says, that's the Eucharistic chapel? He goes, yeah. He goes, shut that door. The Pope cannot know the Eucharist is in there. Why? Why is that? Because every single time the Pope passes a Catholic church or sees a Eucharistic adoration chapel, he feels the need to go in there and pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament. But he prays for 2 or 3 hours, and he doesn't stop. And every second of his day, it's organized and planned very meticulously. It throws off the entire schedule. When he arrives tonight and he wakes up tomorrow morning and he passes by here, he cannot see that door is open. It'll throw off everything. Shut the door. Okay, they shut the door. All right, John Paul II arrives. He comes in the next day. He's walking down that hallway. Remember, every door is identical. He passes the door to go out of the mansion, pauses, stops, looks at that door for a couple seconds, looks back at Father Tucci and goes, don't do that to me. Walks inside, kneels down and prays for however long, probably throwing off his schedule for the whole day, right? He could sense the Eucharist, and he's not the only one that could do that. There was a mystic named Therese Neumann, German mystic who died in 1962. If she went to a new town, she'd know where the Catholic Church was because she could sense the presence of the Eucharist. She'd say, it's that direction. I don't know how to get there. It was over that way. How? She goes, I can feel Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. You know how mothers have this intuition? My wife, she's incredible. Like I said, 3, 1, and 0 are the ages of my children. She has this intuition. Something woke up in her that I didn't realize was there. And she was already amazing. That's why I was dating her, right? When she had kids. It really brought out her best, let me tell you. You know how mothers, they have that intuition when something's wrong with their child, they just know it, Same thing with the saints. Some of these saints, John Paul, he could just sense the Eucharist because he loved Christ and understood him so deeply in that sacrament. That same mystic, Therese Neumann, lived off the Eucharist for 40 years. From 1922, you can look it up when you get home, until 1962. This woman, it was well known, well documented, round the clock, people were with her. She ate and drank almost nothing. She should not be able to survive on it. And she was completely fine. 1962, she passed away, and she was big boned, right? And people would say, "How are you not dead? You haven't eaten in 3 weeks." She's like, "Oh, I just receive the Eucharist every day. It's fine. Jesus sustains me. Please don't try that at home. Don't do that at home." As a teacher, I have to tell my students, don't go home and tell your mom when she says, "What'd you learn today?" "Oh, my religion teacher said not to eat anything because the Eucharist." Don't do that. Okay. She was a gift. She was a mystic. That was a gift. But that's completely legit. I mean, that's well documented. If you think that's cool, servant of God, Luisa Picaretta, 1882, to 1942, bedridden, 60 years, received the Eucharist every day, ate and drank pretty much nothing. These are signs that God gives us to remind us, I do love you that much. I'll give you one more. A priest was on the way to a town called Lanciano about 1,200 years ago. He was a Basilian monk, and he was later said he was having doubts about the Eucharist. He was going to a little church to celebrate Mass, and he was actually thinking, is that really Jesus or is that just bread? As he's celebrating Mass in that little church, during the consecration, he hears people shouting, what's that? What's that? He looks up at the host, and he literally sees that the host is turning into actual flesh. He says he looks at it, and he'd actually feel like it was like skin. It felt like actual flesh in his hands. He looks at the chalice, and after he does the chalice, he puts it back down. The chalice starts to overflow by itself. It's a dark, thick, red liquid. Looks like human blood. He's like, is this what's going on here? What am I witnessing? He was not the only one to see it, because everyone in the church stands up and screams, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's known as the miracle of Lanciano. Again, that was 1,200 years ago. They took the remnants of the host and the blood, what they thought to be blood, and put it on display where it still is in that church today. Again, like over 1,000 years later. Well, of course, 1,000 years later, 20th century, you have a lot of skeptics. Oh, those medieval people, they were such fanatics. They lie about these things. That could be anything on display in that little case. That wasn't a real miracle. So in the 1970s, they liquefied the blood and they did tests on it. You know what they found out? They found out the blood was still alive and that it was human blood and that the flesh was real human flesh. Now, the blood still had properties of being alive. That's totally a miracle. No scientific explanation. It was a really Eucharistic miracle. You know what else they found out? They found out it was heart tissue, blood type AB. Okay, one more story. 1996, Argentina, much more recent. A priest is celebrating Mass. After Mass, a woman comes up with a Eucharistic host that had been fallen to the ground, unconsumed. She gives it to him. Now, he has a couple ways of getting rid of this host or disposing of it, I should say. He can either eat it or he can put it in water, let it dissolve. He decides to put it in a bowl and let it dissolve. He comes back a little while later. He sees a red substance coming off the host. It's like, what's this? He gets the Archbishop involved, Jorge Bergoglio, now Pope Francis. They take a few pictures, they put it back, like, I don't know what to make of this. They come back a while later, they check on it again. Not only is there a red substance coming off the host still, the entire bowl was red. The entire bowl, all the water, everything was red. You couldn't even see the host anymore because the entire thing was red. This substance was continuing to come off the Eucharist. They had it tested. They gave it to one of the leading, I believe, forensic pathologists, hematologists in all of South America. And they asked, you can look it up again, the details when you get home. But they said, can you please do tests on this? They didn't tell him what they thought this substance was or where they got it from. They just said, here's this substance. Can you tell us what it is? And he goes, all right. He runs a few tests, comes back. He says, I can tell you exactly what this substance is. He said, this is human blood. He said, this is blood type. What blood type do you think it was? AB. This is blood type AB. He said, it's tissue from the human heart. Tissue from the human heart. And he says, and furthermore, I can tell you one more thing. This person that you've gotten this blood from was close to death. This person had been beaten very badly around the area where the sample was taken from. Someone who was tortured in this area, close to death, blood type AB, tissue from the heart. Because that's what I could tell you. When they said the substance was coming from a Eucharistic host, he could not believe what they said, but he stuck to his testimony. That happens a lot. There have been dozens and dozens of cases like that throughout the history of the church, and modern science has studied many of them, and it's always, every single time, human blood, blood type AB, tissue from the heart. It's the same person. It's the same person. Guys, I don't want to go through who do you think that is. That's Jesus. He really is giving himself to us that much in the Eucharist. He loves us that much. Every single Mass, you're receiving every bit of the love and the suffering he gave from you. And not just that, but his resurrection too. All the goodness and the love and the joy, the victory of the resurrection, all of that. Every single Eucharistic host carries all of it. Now, you understand what the early church were risking their lives for? It was that. And we got to start having that mentality again, right? Because if you really let the Eucharist in your heart, if you really open yourself up before you receive the Eucharist, amazing things start happening. So you can go in the back and get one as you leave, 7 reasons, 7 ways that you can let the Eucharist transform you into the saint of the new millennium that you're supposed to be, that John Paul II asked us to be. And I'll go through them pretty quickly. Number 1 Get to daily Mass as often as possible. Guys, I'm not going to lie. When I was I had a conversion at 19 years old. I was not in my faith at all when I was in high school. When I was that age, I missed Mass one time. I was 17 on a Sunday, and I was feeling super holy because me and my family didn't go to Mass every week anyway. I went once a month maybe. But for whatever reason, it was summertime. I was feeling very, very holy. And I said, you know what? I'll make up for this by going to Mass on Tuesday. Don't do that. It's not the same thing. I thought it was, right? I walk in there, and I thought no one's going to be in there Tuesday morning. I walk in, and there are people in the church on a Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. Lo and behold, I walked in there, and I thought, oh my gosh, what is wrong with these people? That's what I thought to myself. It's like, these people have no lives. What's going on here? There shouldn't be people in here. Who goes to church on a Tuesday, right? Guys, having had a conversion experience, I would never, ever say that, ever now. There's not been a day since I found my faith that I haven't started off with daily Mass that I haven't felt much better. In fact, I dare you, next time you can get to daily Mass, go. 25 minutes long, half hour, right? It's almost nothing. I dare you to try to feel more anxious than you were coming in that building when you leave. You can't. It's impossible. Why? Because the Holy Eucharist gives you actual graces every time you go to daily Mass. And in fact, now with 3 little kids, I'm finding it very hard to get to daily Mass. So yeah, like the way I wake up in the morning, I'm not even kidding you. Every single morning, you know how I wake up? I just feel pokes against my face. And I wake up, and my 1-year-old daughter is inches from my face. And she goes, wake up, Daddy. That's how I wake up every morning, right? As a teacher, I get up before them. But in the summer, oh my gosh, right? She's cute. She's got that going for her. So it works out in her advantage that she's really cute. But it's hard to get to daily Mass. If you can get there, please, please go. It is the most beautiful way to start your day. St. John Vianney said, when we receive the Eucharist, we receive such an excitement. He goes, we receive a joy, a fragrance that lightens up the entire body and the soul. He says your body and your soul experience beautiful effects when you receive Jesus in the Eucharist. So go as often as you can. That same mystic, Therese Neumann, she had a special gift. She knew when someone had just received the Eucharist. If you came to visit her and you came in her room, by the way, American GIs loved her because when the Americans came and liberated Germany during World War II, many of the Catholic ones found out about this holy mystic who lived there. They would go visit her. And as soon as they came in, if they had received the Eucharist, she'd say, oh, how was Mass? They'd say, how did you know I just came from Mass? She'd say, you're glowing. I see the glow of the Eucharist inside your belly. I can see it glowing. She said that. She knew many times, dozens of people, right? Another person, another gift she had is she could tell if someone was a priest or not. She could tell if someone was a priest. She said their hands would glow, which is why it's so important to pray for our priests, because only a priest can make that bread and wine, the body and blood of Jesus. Only those consecrated hands can really do that. So pray for our priests. One time there was a bishop that was posing as a bishop, wasn't really a bishop, and was going around scamming people out of money. He was wearing the whole bishop's getup. He was going around taking donations. And one unsuspecting person said, oh, I know Therese Neumann. Why don't you come with me and you can meet her? And the guy's like, no idea who that is. He's like, okay, sure. So just to play the part, he goes along. As soon as he walks in the room, she screams at him, you're an imposter. You're an imposter. Get out. Your soul's in danger. And then he's like, and he runs, right? Everyone looks at it and goes, Therese, what are you doing? You can't yell at a bishop like that. She goes, that was not a bishop. He wasn't even a priest. I did not see a glow coming from his hands. And obviously it came out that she was correct. So pray for our priests. Get to daily Mass when you can. Number 2, clear the junk in your heart before you receive. Make sure you clear out all the junk. That includes your venial sins, mortal sins. Make sure you get into confession before you receive the Eucharist. Not because God hates you or anything, but just because you want your soul and your heart to have a clean slate, because that's when God can operate most. And there's I don't have time to get into it, but St. Paul says there's a double judgment that happens if you receive the Eucharist in a state of mortal sin. It's actually really bad for your soul. It's kind of like going to hell in mini, because when you die and your heart's not ready for Jesus, right? It's not that God wants you to go to hell or is mean or anything like that, but you see God's love and it becomes scary because there's things in your heart and your soul you never dealt with, and you kind of want to run from him, but you have nowhere to run except nothingness, which is pretty much akin to hell, right? But what happens if your heart's not ready for the Eucharist? What are you receiving with the Eucharist? A piece of heaven. That's all of God, Jesus in the Eucharist. You're receiving a foretaste of heaven. So if you force heaven into your body and into your soul when your soul's not ready for it, your soul has nowhere to run. And so it almost it dies and runs away from God in mini, which increases your judgment. So make sure you get to confession. I do think that God is very proud of us, actually. this is a little, I don't want to say it's controversial, but when there's something in our hearts that's not right between us and God, and we leave Jesus up there on the altar, I actually think he's kind of proud of us for doing that. It's not easy to admit to yourself and to God that you're not ready and that you need to receive the sacrament of reconciliation. And I actually think he's like really appreciative of that you leave him up there, go to confession, and to go receive. I was at a town in Atco, New Jersey. I was a youth minister there for a year. I gave a talk on the Eucharist, and a parent came up of one of the kids, and this woman was very, very low-key. She was not a miracle-chasing woman. She was not a fanatic, very, very soft-spoken. This is the only conversation I had with her. But she came up to me, and she said, I'm really glad you talked about the Eucharist today. I said, why? She goes, well, I have a story for you. She said, I've been Catholic my whole life. I go to Mass every Sunday, all that. And she said, basically her dad did something egregious to her. She said something happened where her dad did something absolutely egregious, and her father were not getting along. She knew God wanted to forgive him, but she just couldn't. And so she was super honest about it with God, and she said, I can't forgive. She continued to go to Mass, but knowing that Jesus would rather have her forgive, she said she left Jesus up on the altar and just continued to go every Sunday. About 3 years went by, and her father reconciled. And I believe she said she even went to confession for it and felt they had a moment, and she forgave him from her heart. She goes to Mass next Sunday, knowing full well she's ready for Jesus. She goes up there, and she said, when I received the Eucharist, she goes, I can't explain what happened, but she said, it's going to sound really weird, but when I received it on my tongue, I felt like it was like flesh. It tasted salty, and it tasted like somebody's actual skin. It tastes like actual flesh on my tongue. Now, that sounds so weird, but she didn't take it that way. She said, I knew that was Jesus saying, thank you so much for being honest. Thank you for leaving me up there when you weren't ready, and most of all, thank you for forgiving your dad, right? Beautiful actual story she told me. One last thing I would ask you to do. Please make sure that you give your anxieties and your fears, even the non-sinful stuff, all your fears, your worries, your anxieties, dump that onto Jesus first before you receive the Eucharist as well. Get to Mass 5 minutes early. Just tell him what's bothering you. Get all that off your chest. I have one more story on that. Now, I got married, as I said, in the middle of COVID. Okay, middle of COVID was our wedding. I remember I came home from work one day, and I come home, and we had just been married maybe we've been married about a month, 5 weeks maybe, okay? I come home from work, I walk in the house, and my wife's standing there, and she's like this. She goes, hi. I said, hey. And I just, walk around. She goes, how was your day? I was like, it was good, thanks. How was yours? It was really good. I said, okay, thanks. So I just keep walking, and I take my little briefcase off. She goes, was your day good? So, didn't you just ask me? Yeah, it was good. It's good, thanks. She goes, great. And then finally she goes, are you even going to look? I said, what? And I looked over, and she had a whole display set up. It said, hi, Daddy, baby Palmieri coming summer of 2021, a little doll. And then she had the little stuffed doll that I used to play with when I was a little baby. I guess she talked to my parents on that one, A whole display set up for me, telling me she was pregnant, right? And my first thought when I saw this was, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is crazy, right? I wanted lots of kids. She wanted lots of kids. This is great. This is crazy. That lasted for about 2 seconds. Because you know what I realized then? I'm a Catholic school teacher. Great job. You don't do it for the money necessarily, right? Catholic school teacher. JMJ Missions was brand new. It was middle of COVID. We had no talks booked. I was in debt from seminary. I was in debt from the wedding. And I was living in my parents' basement because of all these financial issues. I thought, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And my stomach sunk into my foot. I thought, I can't pay for this kid. I am not ready. And my wife told me later she felt the exact same way. She was trying to be excited, but we were both really, really worried. And I still feel bad that I felt this way. But my reaction was fear and inadequacy because of finances. And thanks be to God, something told me, you shouldn't feel this way. Why don't you go to Mass? So it was a Wednesday. Our parish had a Wednesday night Mass. We go to Mass. And at the offering, the elevation, when the priest takes the bread, the body and the blood, and says, through him, with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father. You know that part, right? At that part, what we're supposed to actually do is offer our own selves with Jesus to God the Father. It's Jesus has given himself to God the Father, and we're all behind him giving ourselves too, okay? So at that moment, again, I'm feeling fear and dread, and like I didn't feel good enough. I felt like financially so many issues. I said, God, I don't know how I'm going to take care of this kid. I said, I am not ready for this. Financially, I don't feel ready at all. I said, but you know what? Here, I'm just going to give you my life. Here you go. Here's everything. You'll have to take care of it. All right? And I gave it to him during the elevation. And I felt completely better after Mass. No, totally kidding. I didn't feel good at all. Didn't work at all. I remember after Mass, I was like, man, that didn't work at all, right? But it did, because the next day, God answered the prayer. I was driving home from work again, and again, I was just thinking, like, I'm not ready. Karen and I, we're both not ready. And then out of nowhere, like a thunderbolt, it hit me. You know, these things don't happen by accident. Like, God went out of his way to do this, and when God does something, he does not make mistakes. So you might not think you're ready, but if God thinks you're ready, because he wouldn't have done this otherwise, then you're ready. Doesn't matter what you think. You're definitely ready. You're wrong. He's right. It's going to be fine. And all of a sudden, it was like the weight came off. I was like, wait a minute. If God thinks we're ready, I guess we have to be ready then. Like, we must be ready. I was wrong about that. We're ready. And the weight came right off. And guys, it's been amazing ever since, right? Amazing. You know, so Danny, we're so happy we have him. You know, go figure, another little Danny, right? So Dan's got Danny. I got Danny at home, right? And then Adelaide was born a year and a half later. And then our newest son, Benjamin, is 6 months old, right? So he's taking care of absolutely everything. And I know it's because I offered everything to him before receiving the Eucharist at Mass. He'll do the same exact thing for you guys, I promise. Okay, number 3. Again, you can go to the back table. We have all these handouts and grab all these points as you leave. I highly encourage you to do that. And we spend the most time on these 3 points. The last 4, we're going to breeze through, so I promise you will not be here at 9 p.m. Okay, number 3 is visit the Lord often in Eucharistic adoration. So people make fun of Catholics for the Mass. They say, oh, you guys invented that in the medieval ages. That's totally not true. We have all kinds of historical documents supporting it. Eucharistic adoration, where Father takes the Eucharist, puts it in the monstrance, puts it up on the altar, that is completely a medieval thing. Guilty as charged, right? But what a great idea. I mean, some dude, probably a theologian or a saint, right, thought, you know what, if that's really Jesus, why don't we just like put him up on the altar and we'll all just pray to him? Like, that's really him. Duh. Oh, yeah, sure, let's do it. And guys, the graces have been pouring in ever since. In fact, I can't think of one saint the last 1,000 years, literally the last 1,000 years or so, that has not been into 2 things, the rosary and Eucharistic adoration. There's something about sitting in front of Jesus in the Eucharist where you just get graces by osmosis, right? Like, if you're praying the rosary or you're doing any other prayer, you kind of got to focus, you got to put your heart into it. Adoration, you actually don't have to do that. If you just sit there, a drool can be coming out of your face. You know, you might not even know where you are. Somehow you're going to get holier because the graces from the Eucharist are going to come off and hit you in your soul. Blessed Carlo Acutis, the wonderful young man who made, everyone's been talking about him. He made this website of Eucharistic miracles, died in 2006. He's buried in Nikes, go figure, right? Wonderful young man. He will be a saint very soon next year. He literally said that sitting in front of the Eucharist is like getting a suntan. He's like, when you were at the beach and you're sprawled out, you get tan because of the rays of the sun. If you sit in front of Jesus in the Eucharist, you get spiritual rays of the Son of God coming in and making you into a saint. So we got to go to Eucharistic adoration whenever we can. I have one last story, and that's I have a teacher at Holy Cross. And our first year after it reopened, as like a newly independent Catholic school, we did a retreat at the end of the year. And the entire school was going to be on this retreat, about 240 kids, small school. So on this retreat, the last half hour, we had Eucharistic adoration set up. Now, these kids had never prayed in front of the Eucharistic adoration pretty much in their lives. Maybe 1 or 2 of them with their families. They had no idea what adoration was. These kids didn't pray much like as it is, unfortunately, right? So we had teachers come up to us and say, on the itinerary, you have a half hour of adoration. That's like too long. These kids don't know how to pray. You got to take that out. They can't focus. They're kids, right? TikTok generation. They got no attention spans. You got to take that out. We thought about it. We were like, you know what? No, like it's the Eucharist. What can go wrong? Let's just leave it in there, see what happens. Okay, so we put the Eucharist out there. We have all the kids set up. And Father comes around with the thurible, the incense, right? So he comes in. He's doing the incense with the thurible. And like good Catholics, what do you think one kid starts to do? Coughs, right? Coughing. And another kid sees that kid start coughing because of the incense and go, oh, that's funny. And he starts coughing too. And then 2 more kids, they start coughing as well. By the way, a priest once told me a story that was like the Easter Vigil. They did incense, a lot, like, coming around the entire, maybe it was Holy Thursday. They're coming around the entire church processing with the incense. And everyone, of course, is coughing up a lung. Everyone's, coughing. They could barely breathe. He looks afterwards. The charcoal never lit. He never actually burned the incense. No, I'm just kidding. I have coughed before when there's incense around. But these kids are coughing. And they're like making fun of the whole thing by coughing. And it's going on. It's getting louder and louder. Now, I'm a pretty patient teacher, sometimes like too patient, right? But I look at these kids and I wanted to be like, do you have any idea who's up there? That's Jesus. You have any idea how much he loves you? Interesting that you would scream about Jesus' love like that, but that's what I wanted to do, all right? Something told me don't do that, so I didn't. I just kind of let them do their thing. After a few minutes, the coughing fit ended. I put the little Eucharistic Adoration playlist on, and out of nowhere, a couple minutes go by, and a senior boy, junior or senior, football player, popular kid, gets up out of his seat. I thought he was going to the bathroom. He did not. He made a turn the other direction, walks right up to the Eucharist, kneels down in the kneeler in front of the entire school, and I thought he was trying to do it for attention, to kind of make fun of it, and I almost yelled at him. And I look at him, and I see, no, he's praying really intently. He got up in front of the entire school, said a heartfelt prayer to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, not worrying what people thought of him. I was like, wow, that's crazy. A couple of his friends start nudging each other. I thought they were going to make fun of him. They were not making fun of him. They got up. They said, do you want to go up there too? They were inspired by what he did. They spontaneously got up. They knelt on either side of him on that kneeler. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I see 3 or 4 girls talking. I was about to yell at them. They all get up. And no offense, but I thought for sure these girls were going to the bathroom. They did not. They turned the other direction. They all knelt on the other side of the boys. And they're all kneeling there now. And I'm like, what's going on? 10, 15, 20 kids on the hardwood floor all spontaneously start praying to Jesus. I look around, then I notice everyone's crying. Like these kids are crying as they're seeing these kids do this. When 5 of them would come sit down, 5 more would come take their place. When 2 would sit down, 2 more would spontaneously get up and take their place. The teachers in the back, the ones that were saying to take adoration out, they're crying. The vice principal comes up to us. She goes, I was not expecting this. We got to extend this. This is amazing. We extended it by 15 minutes because if we did it any longer, they would have missed their bus, and we had to tell them all to go sit back down in their seats so we can close out the retreat. They felt something. Those kids felt something. And as a youth minister and a teacher, that is not the only time that's happened in adoration. There's something going on because Jesus really is there. So get there as much as you can. A big inspiration for us is Archbishop Fulton Sheen, because he'd always write JMJ at the top of his lectures if you have any Fulton Sheen fans and his old telecasts, right? So he was once asked, because remember, he was like the #1 show on ABC in the 1950s and 60s. Go figure. He would get in front of millions of people and talk like this. Like, this is not too bad, but I can't imagine doing this in front of millions of people. I would probably wet myself and run off this camera, right? So he would just ad-lib everything. And he would just go. And people would say, where do you get all this from? How do you do this? Where do you get all this knowledge from? He goes, it's not me. It's Jesus. They said, what do you mean? He said, when I was ordained a priest, I made a promise to God that not one day would go by in my priesthood where I wouldn't give 1 hour to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament and adoration. So I made a holy hour in adoration every single day. That's where all the graces come to speak. That's where all my thoughts come. And then he said, I've also asked for a very special gift. I've asked Jesus that if he wills it, I would like to die in my holy hour of adoration. And that is where they found him. He passed away in his adoration holy hour. So God did grant that prayer, right? Adoration, please go. Number 4, offer communion for people that need it most. It's 2024. I know every single one of you have probably a handful, not just one person. I used to say one person, a handful of people that you're really worried about their souls, right? Well, you could pray for them. Beautiful. But the Eucharist is the most powerful way you could pray for somebody because it bypasses all of our lack of merits, and it's all based on Jesus, his sacrifice. So when you receive the Eucharist, as you're going up the line, the communion line, pretending this is like a church, right? By the way, when I went up here to tell Dan about the parking, I literally almost genuflected right there. That's how I felt, right? So when you would go up in line, what I do is I almost like imagine myself taking their soul with me, that person I'm thinking about, that I'm worried about, who's away from God. And as the Eucharist goes down into my heart, you can do it however you want, right? I say, hey, God, as unworthy as I am, and this person, take all the graces I'm getting, please just give it to them. And it is actually the most, like theologically, it is the most powerful thing you can possibly do for someone who needs God, is offer the Eucharist for them. Number 5, we're going to roll here. Offer the Eucharist for the souls in purgatory. Where are the souls in purgatory trying to get to? They're trying to get to heaven. Every one of them is on the way to heaven, right? What are you receiving when you receive the Eucharist? You're receiving heaven. That's Jesus. Jesus equals God. Heaven equals being one with God. Jesus equals the Eucharist. Therefore, it's like algebra. Eucharist equals heaven. If you receive the Eucharist and you offer it up for a soul in purgatory, it's like they're going to feel heaven in you and get that much closer. It's beautiful. In fact, every mystic that's been able to have the visions of souls in purgatory, they've said two things. Either that soul in purgatory asked for a mass to be offered if they were a priest, or that communion graces be offered if they were not a priest. St. Faustina, for example. I'll leave you with one story about Padre Pio about that. Any Padre Pio fans in here? St. Padre Pio? I love him, right? He's literally like a spiritual Jedi. I mean, come on, look at how he's dressed. I think George Lucas got old Ben Kenobi. I'm 99% sure he got that from Padre Pio. Because he like almost has superpowers. They're not. They're charismatic gifts, but you know. Okay, young Padre Pio praying in his cell. He looks up. He sees a person in his cell at like 9 p.m. at night. A little weird, right? Layman dressed in normal clothing. He's like, whoa, who are you? The man talks. He says, my name is Pietro di Mauro. He says, when this monastery, before it was a monastery, when it was a house for the poor, I was in this cell. I lived in this cell. I lit a cigar one night, and I woke up, or I went to sleep with my cigar still lit by accident. I woke up, the room was on fire. I unfortunately passed away in this room in that fire. He said, God has allowed me to appear to you in order to ask that you celebrate Mass for me tomorrow, because if you celebrate Mass for my soul tomorrow morning, it'll help my soul tremendously in my journey to heaven. Padre Pio said, sure, I'll do that for you. But just in case, he's like, all right, let me walk you out real quick, you know? So he goes to walk this guy out, and as he's walking him out, he says, as they walk out, he goes, his own words, Padre Pio said, I became aware that I was talking to a deceased person only when, as he walked out into the courtyard, the person who was beside me, he suddenly disappeared. He said, I must confess, I re-entered the monastery a little frightened, right? Padre Pio did go into the archives and checked, and that all checked out. There was a man who lived in his cell with that exact same name who died on the day that he said he died, right? What did he ask for? Mass, the Eucharist. Number 6, remember that in the Eucharist, your sufferings are united to Christ. Every single one of us is going through something, emotional, physical, doesn't matter what it is. Every single one of us are going through some kind of sufferings. It is part of life. You know what's amazing is God can take your sufferings and he can use them for good. He can use them as a super prayer to help the people that you're worried about, right? So, for example, what did Jesus do on the cross? He suffers and dies. And what do you receive in the Eucharist? Every time you receive it, you're receiving Jesus in his suffering and death. It's like his suffering and your suffering become one every time you receive the Eucharist. And all of a sudden, your suffering lights up and it has power to save people, just like his suffering had power to save people. So one of the best things you can do, number one, to offer for people that need it, for your prayers, like people that need graces, is offer your sufferings for them and offer it in conjunction with Jesus in the Eucharist. It's also consoling because, like, if we're all going through something, when you receive Jesus, you and him, again, you unite. It's like he's getting down in the foxhole with you. It's literally like he's getting down in the dirt and the muck saying, I'm here with you. I suffered, you're suffering and mine. We're one now. Now let's get out of this. And spiritually, he can lift you out and bring good out of it. Okay, number 7, the last and final point. Let Christ complete his sacrifice in you. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross beat death, it beat sin, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. It won the war, which is weird, but the battles are still going on in every single one of our souls. The war is already won, but every one of our souls is going through a battle. So let him in your heart. What's the best way that you can unite with him so you can win the battle for your soul and let him sacrifice with love for other people? It's in the Eucharist. When you receive the Eucharist, it's like a weapon to fight off the devil in your heart, a weapon of love, of goodness, of hope, of joy, of forgiveness, of light, fighting off all the darkness in this world. So let him complete his sacrifice in you. My students always say, Mr. P, why did Jesus have to ascend to heaven? Why couldn't he just stay here with us all the time? If he resurrected, why not? Why isn't he just chilling here with us? And I had to think about that, and I was like, you know why? Because if Jesus was on earth with us physically, we'd all just be staring at him. All right, buddy, you get him, Tiger. Do your thing. What do we have to do? It's Jesus. He can do whatever he wants. He's going to save the whole world, right? No. It's more important and more glorious for Jesus to jump inside our souls and jump inside our hearts and our bodies and use us to save the world than us to just be staring at him. It gives our whole life meaning. How does he do that? The Eucharist. He says, I'm not content to you guys just staring at me. I'm only going to be content when you let me in your heart and let me use you to save the whole world. And let's be honest right now, our whole world needs it. Our whole world needs it. People are so lonely. They're lacking purpose. They don't know why they're here. They're lacking love, right? The love of Jesus in the Eucharist inside you has the ability to save the whole world, and we have to take that seriously. One of my favorite stories is the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. They're walking along, and as they're walking, they heard stories that Jesus might have resurrected, but they weren't buying it. They're like, no, that didn't happen. And they're talking about all the things that had happened. They said, you believe he was so holy, he was amazing, and then all of a sudden, like he's doing all these miracles, and he's crucified this horrible death of a criminal, and he's done. That's so anticlimactic, this stinks, right? And a stranger comes up. Stranger says, what are you guys talking about? They say, are you the only person like in this whole vicinity that hasn't heard of Jesus of Nazareth and how he was died? And we really thought he was a Messiah, and he just died. It's just awful, you know? And he says, oh, how foolish you are. Why are you so slow to believe all the prophets that said, wasn't it necessary that the Son of God had to die and then resurrect to like beat sin? And they're like, what do you mean? He walks with them. He breaks down the entire Old Testament and why it was going to have to happen this way, why he was going to have to suffer and die. And it says their hearts were burning within them as he spoke. They could feel something as he was speaking. Dusk comes around this time right now. This time of the day, the sun starts to set. He makes it look like he's going to go on a little further. They're going to go in this little hut on the side of the road. They said, hey, you want to come with us? You've been really great. Why don't you stay with us? He goes, okay. They all sit down in this little hut. And then this stranger takes bread. And he says a prayer, a long prayer over it. And he breaks it. And in my mind, here's how this gospel story goes down. In my mind, they look at each other. It's him. They said they realized who this man was in the breaking of the bread. He breaks the bread. They look at each other. Oh my gosh, it's him. They look back. He's gone. Disappeared. Now, why did he do that? Was it just to look cool? That was pretty cool, right? It's pretty good at like stage exit, right? No, that was on purpose because he left them the bread. Can you imagine being them? He's gone, that amazing experience. You look down, what's still on the table? That bread's still like right on the table right in front of you. The bread that he just broke, that he just said a prayer over is right there. He left us the bread. He's not really gone. It's like he's saying, I love you so much. I'm not content with just loving you spiritually. Here I am in the bread. You will always have it as long as there's a Catholic Church around. So let's make our ways over to the church every Sunday, every day if we can. Let's let the Eucharist light us up into the saints we're supposed to be. I'll give you one more last story. This may be my parting words. When my son Danny was about 1.5 years old, as little Danny walks around, other little Danny walks around here. When my son Danny was 1.5 years old, I was putting him to bed one night. Now my kids are awful at going to bed. And we don't really do it right. We get yelled at all the time. Please don't give me parenting advice because we get way too much of it from our families, okay? They don't go to sleep in their own beds. You know how they sleep? They both jump around on the bed until they tire themselves out, and they hit me, and they beat me, and they punch me, and they flip over me until they tire themselves out. Then they fall asleep, and then I move them to their beds, okay? So my son is jumping all around, punching me, kicking me. You know, I'm like, gosh, okay, kid, you got to go to sleep. You know that feeling if you're a parent, right? And finally, he looks at me, and he out of nowhere says, Jesus loves you. I was teaching him that. I was hugging him, saying, Jesus loves you, right? And I was like, okay, well, maybe that's good. Maybe he's calming down a little bit. But then out of nowhere, something hit me. You know what? He needs to know that I love him too. So I gave him this huge, big bear hug, and I said, Daddy loves you. Daddy loves you. And I squeezed him for a few seconds, and I let him go. And this kid just looked at me. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. This kid has no attention span. You get 1.3 seconds out of him max, okay? Staring at me, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds, like in all. And I can't explain it, but I knew for sure he somehow understood what I meant. His 1.5-year-old brain, as much as it could comprehend that I cared about him, he got it. And we're just staring at each other. And guys, I'm getting chills now. I literally turned aside. I cried my eyes out. Tears of joy. That's like, I'm a dad, right? It's my vocation. That's who I am. I told my son that I loved him, and his little cute 1.5-year-old self processed it in some way and was like just staring at me. I cried my eyes out. That made my whole week, made my whole month, made my whole year. And all I could think next was this. I'm just a human being. I'm a sinful human being like we all are. Look at God. Imagine God's joy. When he doesn't just give us a hug like I did with my son, he sends his own son to the world and doesn't just hug us from the outside, becomes one with us in the Eucharist just to say, I love you. I love you. And imagine how it makes him feel when we look back at him and we receive him worthily in the Blessed Sacrament and say, I know, I love you too, and thank you. Imagine how much it makes his day. So let's receive the Eucharist worthily, and let's let God use us through the Eucharist to transform the whole world into the saints of the new millennium, which the world needs so badly. Thank you so much. God bless you.